Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So asked poet Mary Oliver. As children, we wanted to be astronauts, movie stars, wizards or unicorns. But as grown-ups, we generally settle for a reasonably comfortable existence with something good to watch on TV and a beer at the end of a hard week. As that other great literary mind Zadie Smith said, what modest dreamers we have become. So what does it take to live a life of fulfilment, of impact, to leave a dent on our small part of the universe? What does it take to explore what's possible and then to realise it, and much more, as we step towards our potential and live the life of our dreams? This is Conversations on Living, a podcast about being well, doing well and living well. I'm Chris Brock, and I'm on a mission to find out how we can go from surviving to thriving. Joining me this week is Nikki Eiberhardt, and she believes that if we align with our purpose, that thing which keeps us awake at night and gets us up in the morning, and if we set our sights on servant leadership, we can empower ourselves and others to take on the biggest challenges and find audacious solutions. Nikki is a professor of business at Minerva University. She's the manager of Delta Airlines Global Talent Team. She works with Global Citizen, with NASA, the Sundance Film Festival, the Nelson Mandela Foundation. She's given a TEDx talk and has achieved so much more than that in an effort to move towards a better world for everyone. And she believes that we all have the power to find our purpose, engage with empathy, and develop a systems thinking approach to achieving amazing themes. This is a really great conversation, and I'm so glad you've tuned in today to listen to this. But before we go into it, I just want to give a quick shout out to my friends at Headliner. Headliner is the app which supports this podcast, and I use it to make audiograms. So they are those social media sized audio clips which have a waveform and some graphics and maybe some captions along with them too. And you've probably seen the things. If you're interested in podcasts at all and you follow any on social media, on Twitter or Instagram, you've probably seen these things popping up. And they are one of the best ways to market your podcast. So if you host a podcast, then definitely check out Headliner. It's easy to use, it's powerful, and you can find out more about it at headliner.app. And also a word about Plane. Plane is a game, it's a meditation game, and it encourages you to use the power of mindfulness to nurture and grow a beautiful island landscape. And in doing so, you learn basic relaxation techniques, meditation techniques, and it's one of a really interesting way of getting into meditation and mindfulness. So if you're interested in that kind of thing and you're interested in video games as well, then check it out. It's at plane.co. That's PLAYNE.co, and you can also search for meditation game and you'll find it there. Also, just a quick request from me to rate, review and subscribe to this podcast, and also to share the love. Tell your friends about it. Tell your mums, your dads, your grandparents, tell your kids, get them to tell their friends. Just tell the world about Conversations on Living, because it's a labour of love to find that thing, that secret sauce to living a full and fulfilled life. You can also find all the other episodes at conversationsonliving.com, and while you're there, check out my books, my writing. I've got some meditations on there, and you can also sign up to my newsletter, and if you do, you get a freebie to download. And that's enough of that. It's time now to get into this conversation, a real standout conversation for me, this one. So do have a listen, and I hope you find it as inspiring as I did. This is me chatting with the amazing Nikki Eiberhardt. So Nikki, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a bit of backwards and forwards to kind of nail down the dates, and we've been talking since before Christmas. But I'm so glad that you've finally been able to fit me in, because to say you're busy is probably a bit of an understatement. So I'm gonna kind of paraphrase a few things from your bio, because there are just too many. We would need 2 podcasts just to go through even your experience, because there's just so much that you're doing. You're a professor of business at Minerva University. You're manager on Delta Airlines Global Talent Team. You work with Global Citizen. You've got a PhD in global sociology, an MA in international development, an MBA from Oxford University. You're a Master of Ceremonies for NASA, or you have been a Master of Ceremonies for the NASA Space Center Cross Industry Innovation Summit. You work with the Sundance Film Festival, the Nelson Mandela Foundation. You've been a board member for UN Women. You presented at TEDx. And there are so many more. I could just keep going and reel it off for another hour or two. But it's probably easier if I just kind of ask you to give us a little bit of background about your story and what has led you to do all of these amazing things and put you in a position now where you say your life goal is to empower people with audacious solutions to tackle the globe's most intractable challenges, which I think is an amazing vision. But maybe if I could hand it over to you just to give us a bit of background about how you got to where you are right now.
Thank you, Chris. It's so lovely to be here with you today, and thank you for inviting me onto your show. I was born, as everyone was, with a set of amazing opportunities and a set of challenges. And I had incredible parents who always taught me the value of empathy and trying to step outside of one's shoes and seeing the world from a different angle. My father grew up with a functioning alcoholic as a father, and he unfortunately was adversely affected by that, both in terms of their socioeconomic status as well as just having a bit of an absentee father. And he vowed to himself that he would be an opposite type of father. And so, fortunately, I was raised by an incredible dad who was very doting and very loving. And he provided a lot of material for us as well, but he never wanted us to forget the roots from which he came, both the amazing aspects of his childhood, but also the hard parts of his childhood and what it meant to not have money. And so he and my mom would provide opportunities for us to engage with refugee populations and work with people of the homeless community. We had the opportunity to spend time in prisons with people who were in high security situations and have religious meetups with them. And so my entire childhood was sort of this juxtaposition between having a lot but knowing that most others did not have a lot. And so in that position, I was given some pretty incredible opportunities. And over time, I realized that I had the opportunity to give other people voice. And how would I go about doing that? And then if you fast forward into my adult life, I felt like I was doing a decent job at that. And certainly there were pitfalls and there were many professional pivots and personal tragedies. I had suffered from 7 separate miscarriages. But at some point, I felt like I was fairly well calibrated around what life goals were. But we were scuba diving in the Yucatan Peninsula in an underground cave system. And when I was scuba diving, I had a complete panic attack. We were in a tunnel system where we had been slowly sort of meandering to this place. And it opened up into a cavern. There was a sandy bottom, but there were absolutely no air pockets, no natural light. And a complete panic attack ensued when my mask started slowly filling up with water. And everything I knew imploded, and I had no idea what to do. And then I lost control. I started ripping off my mask. I tried to rip the BC out of my mouth. And my head sort of went to the top of the cave and was banging against these stalactites. And in that moment, I thought, I'm not going to make it. And what have I done with my life? What difference have I really made? I tried to do some pretty decent things, but what real difference have I made? And so fortunately, I passed out in that moment. And it was fortunate because I would have never allowed the dive masters to get me out of that cave system. But as my eyes rolled back into my head and I went limp, they were able to keep the BC in my mouth and they were able to get me out of that cave system rather quickly. And I came to when we surfaced and I was okay. And so now I'm left with this near death experience where the last question I had for myself was, what have I done with my life? And it gave me a chance to recalibrate again around what was truly meaningful. And so that, in essence, has become my North Star, that I want to make a difference and what most resonates with me. There's so many things we can do in this world and so many ways we can focus our energies. And we all have different core competencies and sets of skills that enable us to make the biggest difference in different areas. But for me, it was tackling global challenges. It was tackling climate change. It was focusing on poverty and migration and gender equity. And so as a result, I've had some fortuitous opportunities in the private sector, in the public sector, with different nonprofit agencies. And some of the most important interactions have been with civil society, where I've had the opportunity to convene some important global moments around really moving the needle in tackling those global challenges.
That's quite a epic story, really. I didn't know that with all your background information, I didn't know that you'd had this kind of near-death experience almost that brought everything into such kind of sharp perspective. How do you go from having an experience like that, a kind of motivating experience that kind of creates this spark of motivation, and then turning that into opportunities to, change the world? How do you suddenly go from diving in the Yucatan Peninsula to working with the United Nations or working with the Nelson Mandela Foundation? How do you use that impetus to actually make real action happen?
It's an excellent question, Chris. I will provide the caveat that I don't do well with this every day. So I'm not really the benchmark to be speaking on this as an expert. But what I have found is that once we lock into purpose, and as I say to my students, find the thing that keeps you up at night, oftentimes because it's so disconcerting that you need to solve for it, but it also gets you out of bed in the morning because you're so passionate to solve for it. That when you find that purpose-filled mission, it becomes your North Star. And so you can keep that front of mind in your day-to-day. Now, the execution part is always the hardest. And so how do I actually process this, and how do I turn it into action? Well, I find first that surrounding myself with incredible like-minded people who have similar goals has been pivotal for me. I've also found that creating actionable items where I can literally check the box. And if it's a bigger, hairier goal, oftentimes you can't really break it down to such manageable pieces, but you can fill when you're making momentum, and you can make the right connects with people in the space whom you may be able to team up with. You can lock in types of funding by having the right conversations. You can be in the right room at the right time. And by positioning yourself in a way that maximizes those opportunities on a daily basis, magical things happen. It doesn't always happen in the timing that I anticipate, and it certainly doesn't happen as efficiently as I would usually like. But at the end of the day, good things happen. And so at least once a day, I try to ensure that I am tackling one of my big, hairy goals in a meaningful way that is really driving, as you mentioned, that action and connecting it to purpose.
Is it a matter of kind of once you've identified your purpose and then you start knocking on the relevant doors connected with that purpose? And, those doors might be about joining a society or joining a group or finding like-minded individuals, or it could be, sending out emails, sending out 50 emails a week or something like that, that eventually one of those doors is going to open. And as you step through, then more doors open, and it almost starts like a chain reaction of kind of bigger and greater steps towards something important.
I think you've described it perfectly well. It's the chain reaction, and it really happens. I mean, sometimes you find yourself having experienced so many of those opening doors that you almost have to revert to, now how do I vet the most important opportunities? Because I certainly can't take all of these. I am one person and I have limited bandwidth. So how can I more tightly curate now all of those opportunities that have opened to me through these various doors? And listen, further to your point, Chris, it's an exponential sort of phenomenon. And I think in the very nascent phases, especially when we make these professional pivots, which the average human being is going to make several professional pivots in his or her career, maybe 6 or 7 over the duration of one's life. It takes faith in the process and a high level of confidence in what you're doing as being the right thing for you at that right time, that those doors will open. And, I do a lot of work with social entrepreneurs who are trying to drive business solutions and tackling challenges and creating successful businesses simultaneously. And they have a lot of closed doors in front of them, specifically with regards to funding their projects. And they may knock on 200 doors and 199 of those will remain closed or slam on them, even more likely. But it is that one that may open to them. And then suddenly it's 10 as a result of that one. And then, as you mentioned, the 100, et cetera, et cetera.
See, I think you touched on something when you talked about faith and confidence. That when we do come up against those doors that just aren't opening for us, we have to have that kind of energy, the momentum to kind of hold, keep the faith and keep going and knock on another door and then knock on another door. And it's the same with anything. When we're not seeing the results we wish to see, it's so easy to give up. And I think most of us do give up. We give up going to the gym. We give up sending our CVs, our resumes off to jobs. We give up trying that little bit harder. I mean, you talked about coming from a kind of religious background. How do you describe keeping the faith? Is it something? Do you connect that with your kind of religious upbringing? And how would you encourage someone who doesn't have religion to, find faith and find the confidence to keep going?
Certainly. Well, I think it's connecting to some sort of higher power. And if it's not a religious inclination, then it can be, the power of the universe. It could be the power of what you have inside of you and how you feel you can share that. And, let's be real. I do a lot of work with executives in corporations where oftentimes they have to be the strong one. They always have to have the game face on. And one important leadership quality that we are trying to inculcate into them is that there is power in vulnerability. It's okay when you don't have a good day, when you feel like giving up, when you can't send out one more resume. And that's okay. Own it. And maybe even share that out with people with whom you're working, because if they see your vulnerability in that moment, it will give them license to fail fast because they know that you've failed, but that you've won also. And it'll give them license to do that, but it'll also enable them to connect with you as a leader in a deeper way. So own that, when those doors slam and when you can't send out that resume, but know that there is a tomorrow and that you can wake up tomorrow and you may feel very differently. And you may have some renewed hope and faith in whatever that higher power is or that power within you. And that it's part of this human experience. You're going to kind of go through these undulating highs and lows. And that's just how it is. It's part of the deal. But so long as you get up on the other side and keep trying, it will pay really handsome dividends.
I suppose this is what you were talking about when you're saying align with your purpose, find the thing that you're passionate about, because that passion and that purpose gives you the extra motivation to keep knocking on that one extra door when all the other ones have remained shut. It must be very hard for you, or it must have been very hard for you when you're dealing with global organizations on a daily basis. And you're probably dealing with a lot of people who probably look down their nose at you because A, you're young, B, you're a woman for a start. And, you're dealing with some probably very stuck in their ways kind of cultures, business cultures, things like that. How do you keep showing up? How do you keep kind of saying, no, I'm going to do this? How do you kind of go against the flow, if you like, in order to, realize your goals?
Yeah, I think true path breakers are always going to have to go against the flow. And I think the trick is to become comfortable in uh, swimming upstream and being okay with that. So I personally try to break it down a couple of ways. I try to look at systems and often imperfect systems that may be unequitable and limiting, specifically, for example, for women and people of color, and separate that from the individuals involved in the system. And I like to almost see it as a personal challenge to win over the hearts and minds of someone or a group of people who may represent the system that I take issue with. But if I can find some common ground with them, then you're likely to reach some sort of consensus or get to a place where perhaps vis-a-vis negotiation, you can both be unpleasantly happy, but you can move forward, right? And then you can say together, now that we're sort of aligned, at least on this one little point, now can we acknowledge that there's a weakness in the system? What can we do as system thinkers together as different stakeholders, but equally impacted and affected stakeholders? What can we do together to move that system in a way that's going to be more representative of what we need it to be? And that could be an organization, that could be a glass ceiling you find in a corporation in terms of leadership and traditionally women and people of color's limited ability to reach those upper levels of leadership. It could be in a bureaucratic system. It could be in a political system that politically underrepresents, or even worse, discriminates against particular groups, right? And so, identifying the system and then finding that common ground so that you can make some sort of difference, I think is a more effective way to do it. Otherwise, I could get really frustrated and in essence, just throw my hands up to the sky and say, now what? Like, this is unbelievable that we're dealing with this level of inadequacy, but now what? And so I find the most effective way to do that is really to make those connections with the people that are running the system.
Yeah, I suppose there's a kind of sense that you can rage against it, but that's not going to get you anywhere. You have to kind of understand what the underlying. It's almost like saying, where does it hurt? It's that question, isn't it? That when you come up against someone who's, in your face, or, against everything you stand for, you can ask them, where does it hurt? Where are the pain points here that are causing you to kind of think like this or be like this? In terms of those systems, have you ever had to identify systems within yourself that have been standing in your own way, kind of belief structures or kind of routines or behaviors or kind of insecurities that you've had to kind of tackle to say, no, I am going to go and knock on this door over here, or no, I am going to tackle this because I see this as a kind of inadequacy in my own internal culture. Is there anything you've had to do yourself?
Excellent question. It's a difficult question to answer. I can think of it on two levels. I'll talk about it from sort of the macro level, and then I can give you a very personal example. So in terms of how that looks on a macro level, for me, being an activist and a campaigner, I have a tendency to see certain parts of the world and the way we operate in the world in black and white, because things often become very moralistic to me. You're either doing something to help the planet or you're not. You're exploiting another human being or you're not. And so as a result, sometimes I can get a bit dogmatic around those causes that I espouse. And so for me, returning to the last point we were discussing, it's important to take a step back and use empathy and ask questions and do a lot of listening to understand what the perception is of that person. Because once I have an idea of at least where they're coming from, I'm less likely to really feel anger towards them. And then I think, again, that's where the growth and the movement can really happen. And then in terms of my own weaknesses, I've got many. But I would say one of those, and I mentioned this on social media recently, and I had this overwhelming response. I think it resonated with people because we often feel this way, but rarely talk about it. And that is imposter syndrome. When we're at the height of our professional careers, or, we've kind of found a niche in what we're doing in our personal lives. And then we're thrust often into situations where we're supposed to play a part. And we'll go into that board meeting and we're expected to sort of be a certain way. But inside, I'll be screaming at myself, I'm not competent to be in this meeting. Look around me at all these individuals and look at their incredible accomplishments. What can I really do? I've completely hoodwinked this group of people in even receiving an invitation to participate. And the analytical, logical side of me says, Nikki, you are insane. Why are you even having these thoughts? These are so false, but also unproductive. But I sometimes in those moments cannot control those thoughts. And I just have to sort of marinate in those thoughts and work through those thoughts. And every single time I've come out feeling more confident and better on the other side. But it's insane to me that throughout all of these professional experiences I've had in life, I still go back to this imposter syndrome mentality sometimes when I walk into those situations.
Do you find it crops up more when you're feeling depleted or tired or a little bit burned out? You get that kind of insecurity when you're not on top of your own kind of wellness, if you like, your own well-being.
Absolutely. 100%. I think you nailed it, Chris. And often when you have too many irons in the fire, you do feel depleted. And so that's when that recharge is so completely necessary. Now, I'm talking about this, but I don't do it well. And I provide mindful moments for my students in classes, and they're so appreciative of it. But I had a student stay after a few weeks ago. She knows how many sort of irons I have in the fire now. And she said, Professor, are you doing this for yourself? Is there much self-care happening in your own life? And I said, you called me on it? No. So in essence, I'm talking the talk, but not walking the walk. So Chris, I mean, it's just how it is, right? It happens, but it's necessary to sort of reclaim those aspects of your life so that you can recharge the battery and ultimately, do what you need to do in a confident way. I could not agree more. It's just hard to do.
It's very hard to do. And it's certainly the time you need it the most is the time when you're probably too busy to do it. It's, the time when you need to take 5 minutes is the time when you can't spare 5 minutes. And that's what makes it so hard almost. We talked about sort of asking ourselves big questions and imposter syndrome and all this kind of stuff. Do you think that this is, and it's something I mentioned beforehand, there's a writer, I can't remember who she is now, but she says, what modest dreamers we've become. And do you think we end up settling for a kind of lesser life in a way because we're afraid of the imposter syndrome, or we don't think we're good enough, or we don't ask the really big questions?
Yes, certainly. Why is that the case? It's easy to settle because sometimes tackling audacious goals is intimidating. But I have a couple of solutions, and these are toolkits that we deploy in the business classrooms and with the executives I work with. One of those is design thinking. It's looking at problem solving from a creative lens where you may just take a subtle step back and envision a set of solutions in a way that you typically would not. And when you do that, it sort of opens up the space to generate new innovative ideas in a way that, upon first glance, if you say, I'm really concerned about carbon emissions on the planet, it feels hopeless. It feels that how could my personal actions possibly make a difference? But if you look at it through a design lens, you say, actually, there's some creative solutions. I'm going to start sourcing those solutions. I'm going to try to identify, do a landscape scan, see who's in the space doing work. What are those important inventors and startup entrepreneurs doing? And how can their work potentially have massive implications for humanity? Maybe I want to be a part of that. It may be small, but it's something. And I really can contribute in this space. And the other toolkit I would suggest is becoming a systems thinker. So if we feel like we're running alone, I mean, again, how can my small contributions make any sort of difference in tackling the climate crisis? But conversely, if I see myself as one cog surrounded by many other cogs in a larger system that has a logic, then I will be more likely to say, okay, I am just a small, tiny little player, but I'm an important player. And if I make the right connects in the right strategic ways, we can make magic, because 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. 1 + 1 can equal 5,000 or more. And it's just tapping into that system. First of all, you have to see the system for what it is. And secondly, you have to tap into it in a way that is going to maximize the actions of a few to, create big impact. And I've seen it so many times with the work we do at Global Citizen in pulling together very disparate stakeholders, from influencers to corporate leaders to startup founders to heads of state, and saying to them, we have this common interest. You're this stakeholder, you're this stakeholder. Come together, let's make magic. And, I've seen it in the corporate space. I've seen it in personal lives, in neighborhoods, clothing drives to serve homeless populations. But you've got to see yourself as a systems thinker, and you have to design around it in innovative ways that haven't been done. Find that unprecedented solution that no one's thought about before. And then I think if you look at tackling big problems through those lenses, then you suddenly feel like you actually can make a difference. And then it's inspiring that you just want to do more and more. It's sort of addictive.
Yeah, it's really interesting you talking about this, because in my other life, I write about automotive development, and they have a thing called systems engineering, where, these days when you're trying to make a super efficient car, you don't just focus on the engine, but you focus on the whole car. So, an engine can only do so much, but if you have super efficient tires, super efficient transmissions, and everything else, aerodynamics, and everything comes together, and you look at the whole picture, even down to the design of the one small cog that you were talking about, it can all sort of add an extra percent here or an extra percent of efficiency there. But overall, you get a car that produces less CO2, and it's much more efficient, it performs better, and all this kind of stuff. But like you say, we can apply this to our own kind of life, our goals, whether it's building a house or getting fitter. You can look at all aspects of your own circumstances, your life, your routine, what time you go to bed, what you eat for dinner, and suddenly everything starts to play a role in this picture, and you design a picture that moves you towards your common goals. You talked about audacious solutions, and you talked about asking big questions. What do you think are some of the biggest questions that we need to ask ourselves that perhaps we're a little bit afraid to confront, if you like?
Will there be future generations? Given the strained state of the planet, what are we leaving the next generation? Will we continue to see an uptick in numbers of refugees around the world. Increasingly, as we tackle climate change and the resulting ecological refugees that we find as a result, sort of a new category almost, coupled with continuing political tensions, economic strains, more disparity between rich and poor, both within and across countries. So what's that going to look like for the refugee problem in 20 years, 50 years? Other questions I would ask around equality. What is it going to take? How many social movements will it require to enable people to be on more of an equal footing, right? To overcome so many historical inequalities, discriminations, exploitation that we've experienced on this planet, and help people to be in a place where they can progress in life however they deem is important to them, and they can own that, right? Those are some. I have many others, but I'd like to hear some of yours, Chris.
I think it's difficult. I try really hard not to get political, but we're talking about systems, and I see nation states as I see, but borders being artificial, made up things. So I kind of think we're one world family of brothers and sisters. We have lots of different cultures, lots of different beliefs, backgrounds, traditions, blah blah blah. But I don't believe that our responsibility as humans ends at our national borders. And if you're talking about systems thinking, I see the human world as a big international system. And that the reason we have refugees coming from over here is because of the failure of leaders over here to speak to leaders over there. And, there's a little elite club of very, senior people who are supposed to be leading the world. And I don't think they're doing their job very well, because if they did their jobs well, you wouldn't have, economic migrants coming from, one country looking for a better life somewhere else. You wouldn't have people fleeing civil war, because there wouldn't be civil war, because our leaders would be doing their jobs properly. And I see that job as just taking care of their people. And to do that means taking care of all people, taking care of the environment, taking care of the world we live in, living in a sustainable way. It doesn't have to be anti-capitalist necessarily. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be any ideology other than the well-being of all people. And that has to include the well-being of the planet. It has to include, the well-being of whether you're gay, straight, black, white, whether you speak Chinese or speak French or speak, whatever it is. There can't be any kind of inequality, because otherwise it unbalances the whole thing. But I worry that we're too juvenile as a species to really appreciate the responsibility. I think we're too caught up in kind of, but I want this, I want more for me. Do you know what I mean? I think that is our big problem, and it's what, well, you sort your stuff out over there and I'll just keep this for me. And I worry that is too much of a challenge for us to take on in this generation, certainly next generation, maybe even 100 generations. That's my big fear.
I love that you captured that. I share the same sentiment. And I also am concerned about human tendency to be really siloed in thinking and draw sharp boundaries around ourselves or our small groups and networks, and at the cost of the well-being of others. But I think it stems from the individual, right? And shifting a mindset and a way of being in one's heart. So the notion of agape love, which is a deep, abiding love, and it doesn't discriminate, that type of love. If we each had just a bit more of that, and we interfaced with the janitor in the public restroom that we were just in, the same way we interface with the CEO of the business we work for, or one of our idols or our influencers in life. And I think I think it starts there. Because then we have less of a tendency to do all of the things you mentioned as politicians and as leaders of the world, to just draw those sharp lines around our tribes.
I mean, it is very hard. I mean, people are under a lot of pressure just to get by, just to put food on the table. Asking people to kind of just go one step further and be selfless and stop looking for someone to blame for their hardship it's quite a tough ask for a lot of people who are, struggling to make ends meet. How can we, how can we encourage ourselves, the people around us, to just be a little bit more, open to each other and to be more gentle in the way they go about their lives?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think there's several ways we could suggest. One of them is just to develop empathy. And even if it comes from a self-centered place, for example, when we're training leaders, how can you be the best leader to achieve the goals you want? Well, let's talk about servant leadership. What does that mean? Maybe your goal is just to excel in the business. But in order to do that, you have to develop some empathy for the people whom you lead. And so, how do you do that? Right? I think at the end of the day, most people are fairly well intentioned. They want to do good to the world, they want to do well in the world. But oftentimes they don't know how, or as you mentioned, Chris, the circumstances that surround them sort of require them to dial in and just circle the wagons. And I feel we've all experienced a bit of this in the height of the COVID pandemic. And but when we try to look outside of ourselves and we say, oh, okay, so I did have a bit more empathy, and it actually felt good because now I'm relating to that person on my team who I thought we had absolutely nothing in common, and now I realize we actually have something in common, and we've developed some sort of relationship as a result. Or if one goes outside of his or her community and says, wow, I live in this amazing suburban area, but 10 minutes from me, there's an entire community of people suffering from homelessness. And they're humans just like me. And what can I do to connect with them? And, again, it's going to be uncomfortable when we do all of these things for the first time or do it again. But over time, I think it becomes, as I mentioned earlier, addictive because it feels really good. And we like to feel good. Yeah. And so, if we provide, we tee up more opportunities for ourselves to have those feel good experiences, I think we'll just want more and more of them.
And that, this ties in very well with what you were saying about systems thinking as well. Empathy as a part of the system, as a part of our kind of human system of going about our day-to-day lives. We talked about wellness and how about the things that make us feel good allow us to show up better for ourselves and for other people. And if empathy can make us feel good, then it gives us more impetus to kind of keep showing up and keep making good decisions. I think it's a wonderful circular conversation we've had in a way, and I'm really grateful for this. If people are inspired by some of the things you've said today and they want to do more, they want to find out more about some of the stuff that you're doing, where is a good place for them to go or to kind of look for inspiration or places where they can help?
Oh, well, I have a website that I'll share with you, and they're welcome to find me there if they want further conversations. I think in addition to that, become a global citizen, learn about the issues, start taking digital actions, come to some of our momentous global events. Seek out opportunities in your local communities to serve. First, again, find what resonates with you. What is the thing that keeps you up at night but gets you out of bed in the morning? And then find the people who are already working in that space and the organizations that are working in that space, and try to just align yourself with them. So I know that's a bit nebulous, but I think everyone has a different set of driving factors. It's just your job to find out what those factors are, and then find the right connections that are going to help you make that change that you want in your life. And ultimately, Chris, it's like we're talking about just having empathy. If we have more empathy for other people, we'll certainly have a bit more empathy for ourselves too. And that also feels really good because life can be really hard. We need to be nice to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, someone said you should try to love yourself like you love the people you love, and treat yourself just like the people you love, and that can be quite hard, but also it gives us opportunity to, give ourselves a kick up the backside when we need it. Also the opportunity to rest when we need it, and we can be a little bit more forgiving of ourselves when we're tired, or, a little bit more forceful with ourselves when we need to kind of step up and take action. So, but no, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And I know you've got more meetings today, so I'm going to end it there. But thank you ever so much. I think there's so much to be inspired by and reassured by from this conversation. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you, Chris. It was really lovely speaking with you. And you've also inspired me and the rest of the audience. So thank you for that.
So that was Nikki Eiberhardt. It was such an inspiring conversation. I just want to get out there now and start knocking on doors and building something with huge impact. If you want to start making an impact now, just think about those things that keep you awake at night and think about what makes you unique, and maybe apply some systems thinking to see where you could contribute to something bigger, or bring about some change you would like to see in the world. I feel really inspired after that conversation. I hope you do too. And if you want to continue the conversation, then head over to our Facebook group. Just search for Conversations on Living. And don't forget to rate, review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find more episodes at conversationsonliving.com. While you're there, sign up for my monthly newsletter, which has some interesting thinking points and some other interesting tidbits in there as well. Next week, I will be speaking with Diane Dreyer about her book, The Tao of Peace, and about how we can walk a life in alignment with who we are. But in the meantime, have a lovely day.